Thanks for joining us on this Wednesday, October 23rd. I'm Phil Ponce. Coming up on Chicago Tonight, striking teachers took their message to City Hall. Facebook CEO testifies before Congress, and a preview of the Art Institute's retrospective on Andy Warhol. But first, amid teacher protests in the Loop today, the mayor delivered her first budget address. In it, she said she'd close an $838 million budget deficit with a mix of savings and new revenue. That new revenue does not, for the time being anyway, include significantly higher property taxes. But there is a catch. Paris Schutz reports.
Striking CPS teachers and support staff shut down the streets around City Hall before, during, and after the mayor's address. Inside, the mayor received a positive reception for a $10 billion proposed budget that she says includes no large property tax hikes and one that must bridge a historic $838 million deficit.
Getting that number down to zero required ingenuity. But more than that, it required hard choices across both expenditures and revenues.
The proposal calls for $537.6 million in, quote, savings and efficiencies and $352.2 million in new revenue. The savings include a plan to refinance a chunk of city debt with lower rates that would net the city $200 million up front. Other savings are attributed to vague boilerplate terms like zero-based budgeting and improved fiscal management.
That means we not only created solutions that will help put our fiscal house in order this year, we created solutions to ensure that it stays in order for years to come.
Some aldermen say they have more research to do on specifics before they give the thumbs up or down.
As soon as I leave you guys, I'm going to get my copy of the budget, and it's going to be pouring through it for the next couple of days, right? We're going to see what's actually in those efficiencies, what's actually in those savings, and of course, what are we funding our departments and offices to do.
Budget watchdog Lawrence Massall says he's cautiously optimistic the budget will be balanced with minimal pain.
It's a very impressive first budget for the mayor. It's a very impressive proposal, mostly because it doesn't rely on the traditional gimmicks that have been a problem in Chicago and in Illinois.
The new revenue includes $47 million from congestion initiatives, $37.2 million in higher food and drink taxes, and $50 million from a higher real estate transfer tax on expensive properties.
That proposal would require approval from lawmakers in Springfield, and if they don't come through, property taxes might be the only other option.
We will be forced to make more painful choices when it comes to new sources of revenue. And we all know what those choices are.
Aldermen acknowledge that Springfield will likely be hesitant to act on the city's wish list, which includes approving a more favorable tax structure for a city casino and help with the city's beleaguered pension funds. Still, the taxes proposed should prove easier for City Council to go along with than a property tax would.
I think people want to see that the city is actually tightening its belt before we ask people for more money, and this seems to be, we've accomplished that.
The toughest sell might be the $47 million congestion initiative that includes a 53-cent rideshare tax hike for solo travelers and an additional downtown surcharge during the week. An Uber spokesperson says those taxes are regressive.
Now, while the mayor did say no new property taxes for city government, there is an $18 million proposed property tax hike for the public library system in order to open libraries now on Sundays. That would make them open 7 days a week. The budget also includes $31 million from a declared TIF surplus and a vow to expand mental health treatment options in the city. But the mayor did not specifically say that she would reopen the shuttered mental health clinics from the last administration.
So what's been the general reaction?
Certainly skeptical from the groups that might be affected by some of these higher tax proposals. You heard the Uber spokesperson opposed to higher rideshare fees, saying it would sock people traveling in underserved neighborhoods more than the Loop, she says. Also some disappointment from the public employee union AFSCME, saying, quote, in short, the mayor's proposed budget fails to expand public mental health services. Equal disappointment from the Illinois Retail Merchants Association, who says that some of their restaurant business have already been hit with higher minimum wages and new worker scheduling restrictions in the city. Their president today said, quote, we urge them being city council, to exercise restraint and consider the negative consequences this would have on an already beleaguered employer community throughout Chicago. Some other small tidbits in this budget, Phil. Higher parking meter rates in busy areas, which could net the city about $8 million, even though we know the city sold those parking meters, but a little loophole would net the city money here. And then a fund to help low-income residents with their water bills.
Paris, thank you. Classes are canceled again tomorrow for day 6 of the Chicago teacher strike. And if you spent any time in the Loop today, you may have found it hard to get around. Tens of thousands of protesters rallied, marched, and sat in on city streets this morning during Mayor Lori Lightfoot's first budget address. They call for more money for Chicago public schools. Brandis Friedman has more. And Brandis, what happened earlier today?
So Brandis, Phil, rather than start the day at the picket lines at schools across the city, as CTU had been doing since day one, the Chicago Teachers Union and SEIU Local 73 held a massive demonstration in the Loop, as we just heard from Paris. They started at 4 different locations in the area and converged on City Hall. Now, we know the CTU and city negotiators have been going back and forth over a number of issues, mostly class sizes, staffing for nurses, counselors, and librarians, teacher prep time, I could go on. But all of that comes down to money, not just salaries for current workers, although CTU and SEIU are asking for higher wages for their lowest paid members, but also money to hire these additional staffers.
Don't be fooled. This city has the funds to provide what we're asking them for. They have it.
We know that the money is there. Just tax the rich and give it to the Chicagoans. That's right. Because we know the money is in those TIP funds. And they need to go into our schools and our communities.
Now, as you just heard, the unions have repeatedly argued that the funding from tax increment financing should be used for schools and not development projects like the Lincoln Yards development. They've also argued that the $1 billion in additional revenue the district receives under the state's evidence-based funding formula should be more than enough to cover the cost of what they're asking for. Enough teachers to put a hard cap on class sizes and to fund nurses, librarians, and counselors in every school. Earlier this week, the mayor said the city doesn't have the money. Here's how Union Vice President Stacey Davis Gates responds to that.
What do I say? I said find it, because we know it's there. You got $1 billion to lower class size. You got $1 billion to fund special education. You got $1 billion to fund bilingual education services. You have to use those things for what we need.
So what can the mayor do to meet the CTU's demand?
Well, Mayor Lightfoot says that she has done all that she can, that her office has made proposals and put in writing, as CTU has requested, demands for a nurse and social worker in every CPS school over the next 5 years, and that they've made proposals to reduce class sizes in the most high poverty schools first. But the mayor has also said the city is out of money. One step that she did take today was to declare a TIF surplus of $300 million. That means $163 million will go toward Chicago public schools, but these additional funds won't meet all of CTU's demands. They'll just help cover the existing contract offer. Some budget experts say that's the best the city can do.
From the rating agencies, the financial condition of the Chicago public schools remains precarious. It's better than it was, but it's hard to see where they would get any large sums of money that haven't already been tapped into.
CTU is making some claims that additional state aid, this $1 billion in additional state aid, should be able to fund their demands. But that money, more than 2/3 of it, is already going to their pension payment. And all along what we've been saying is that if CTU really cares about these other issues, things like class sizes and staff support, then maybe they should be offering to give something up when it comes to pay and benefits.
Now, at this hour, CTU and SEIU 73 are hosting a town hall with some of those lowest paid workers like paraprofessionals and others. Tomorrow, picket lines resume at all 500 plus Chicago public schools, as well as another charter school strike that started this week as well, the Passages Charter School. And Phil, there's no word just yet on negotiations. It seems like both teams are buttoning up while they work this out. We know that they've been at the table most of the day. Even CTU President Jesse Sharkey was not at this massive demonstration today, as he had been for earlier demonstrations this week and last week, because he was at the bargaining table.
Brandis, thank you. And now to Carol Marine and what some of Chicago's aldermen have to say about the budget address. Carol.
Phil, thank you. Well, Mayor Lightfoot has laid out her plan to resolve the city's massive deficit. Any final budget requires the support of Chicago's aldermen. So with a host of cuts, fees, and tax increases on the table, what's the temperature like at City Hall, especially as key items in Lightfoot's proposal require support from Springfield. And where does the ongoing teachers' strike figure into this budget debate? Joining us, our 32nd Ward Alderman Scott Waguespack, Chair of the City Council's Finance Committee, 15th Ward Alderman Ray Lopez, and we hope to be joined in progress by 28th Ward Alderman Jason Irvin, who we think is stuck in traffic. Welcome back, both of you, to Chicago tonight.
Thanks for having us.
So, Alderman Waguespack, this budget proposal avoids a large property tax increase, but Springfield has to buy in, right? Or we're going to get one anyway.
Yeah, I think when the mayor's looking at the real estate transfer tax, she's talking about $50 million there to close part of the budget gap. She's looking at the casino, she's looking at the cannabis legislation that just came, and what they're asking for from Springfield is to work with us to modify the legislation on casinos and then help us with, in the veto session or spring session, with the real estate transfer tax.
Because the casino legislation was considered onerous by the casino potential owners, that they were being taxed too much to make a profit. Is that what the deal was?
Yeah, and I think the city wouldn't make up very much on it either. I think the amounts that we were talking about 10 years ago are even less now.
So, Alderman Lopez, real estate transfer tax hike, changes to casino, pension reform packages. You talk to Springfield lawmakers, you know what's going on down there. Is there an appetite for this conversation?
I don't know if there's been much of a direct conversation with the legislators in Springfield from the mayor's office on these matters. The general sense that I get is that they hear about it, read about it, see it on the news, but there hasn't been that kind of one-on-one lobbying that we're going to need to get any of these measures passed, particularly in the veto session.
That's what they're telling you, that they're not hearing from the mayor's office?
That they're not getting the kind of lobbying effort that they would expect for this kind of intense negotiation that she needs in order to keep property taxes off the table.
Governor Pritzker has his own problems. He's trying to push through a complete reconstruction of the income tax into a progressive income tax. Do you honestly think, Alderman Waguespack, that Governor Pritzker has the appetite for this?
I think he has to. I think when you look at Chicago being interdependent on Illinois and having the largest economy in the state, if not the Midwest, we need to work together, and I think he knows that. I think he knows that people downstate, rely on some of the largesse that Chicago provides in terms of taxes. So the interdependence here is crucial, and I think they will move forward on it.
The budget, as proposed by the mayor, includes $537 million in spending cuts. We've been here before in this idea that we're going to cut the bloat out of the budget. Alderman Lopez, where exactly does that bloat reside and what will be cut?
I think the first thing that we notice with this budget is that it relies on $290 million in efficiencies that Paris even said were just basically cookie cutter kind of descriptions, as well as unrealized gains, the $50 million from the real estate tax, $200 million from refinancing, and $160 million in federal reimbursements for first responders. It's a magic trick that we're doing right now. We're saying that all these things are going to happen, and we have a budget before us that assumes all that's the case, and it's not necessarily the case. And the perfect example of that is the fact that we have 3,100 vacant positions in this budget, costing Chicago taxpayers over $213 million, of which the mayor has only eliminated less than 8% of them in the new budget. Meaning we still have $200 million in bloat in this budget while we're simultaneously saying we need to generate $352 million in new taxes. I don't necessarily believe that we're seeing the efficiencies that we're talking about in a way that's real and legitimate.
Alderman Waguespack, you agree with that?
No, I don't. I think the efficiencies are there. I think the savings are there. There's going to be some areas where we probably could do better, and they're going to have to adjust the numbers. But when I look at something like workers' comp, and for years we've been trying to get that moved out of the Finance Committee, which I now oversee. Part of the savings on our small committee is $1.4 million in salary reductions. When you look at workers' comp and how we're going to work, basically audit that, there's a lot of places where the last administration did nothing, sat on their hands. And if you look at last year's budget, we had a budget that when Mayor Emanuel walked out, where he said there's going to be a $97 million budget gap next year, It's 838 because of the smoke and mirrors that were put in place last time around. I think it's going to be tough for the mayor to get everything that she wants out of this, but I think a lot of the things that are in this budget are appropriate. They're things that we've been talking about for the 12 years that I've been in office, where we've said we need to tackle these issues. Some of it is the vacancies, it's the overtime, it's merging the administrative functions and HR functions of police, fire, and OEMC instead of having 3 different agencies with 3 separate types of administrative functions. All those things coming together and being tackled for the first time by this mayor is something we haven't seen before.
Alderman Irvin joins us now. Traffic was terrible, we realized. Glad that you got here. Part of what we have been discussing here, Alderman, is that all of this sounds fine, no new property taxes except for libraries, but without Springfield, this budget's cooked, isn't it?
I agree that there is some definitely help needed from Springfield to make this work. I am, though, concerned about a lot of the one-time fixes. Eventually, we have to understand, if you want government, we have to pay for government. And while no one wants to talk about increasing property taxes, I mean, our rates have been pretty stable for a long time. And if you move your home anywhere else, you're going to pay more money. And so sometimes we really just need to be honest with the taxpayers, honest with everybody, and let them know that we may have to make some adjustments.
You think your constituents are ready for that?
Nobody's really ready for it. Nobody wants to hear it. But I think we have to be honest with our constituents to let them know. And the other side of this, we need to look at this as an investment, because a house in North Lawndale, the same house, you put it in some other community, the tax bills are way off. And we have to make investments in communities to make it work.
What I'm sort of hearing there is, no, probably Springfield isn't going to come through and we're going to have to raise property taxes. Is that not your assessment also?
I have a fear that while we've put our best case forward, a month from now when we're seeing the final product, we will see a property tax in here somewhere in some form, because a lot of what the assumptions that are made, the magic tricks that are in this budget, if they don't materialize, a property tax will have to be back on the table and in the final product that we vote on next month.
That may not be necessary, because there are investments. We had about $50 million in new investments, and that $50 million is what we're looking for from Springfield. I would hate for us not to make those investments, but if the overall sentiment is that we won't increase property taxes, those investments go out of the window. And that's a real problem for a lot of people in my community.
What is, Alderman Waguespack, statewide pension reform? What's that package looking like?
Well, I think we have to have a conversation with our state legislators. The governor, you talked about the governor at the beginning, you know, he's got his own fiscal problems. Those are our problems too. Again, we're all interdependent on each other. I don't know specifically what the governor is working on. I know that they were talking about consolidation of pensions downstate, but I think we need to look at how Chicago can work with that as well.
But that's a sort of amorphous piece of this budget too, right? I mean, we don't know the numbers, we don't know the categories.
I mean, we still have to maintain our pension obligations, and that's something that we can't walk away from. Those are our obligations. We need to deal with them. What we need to find are progressive revenue streams that will help us offset that. The casino, of course, is one thing, but we also need to look at some other revenue streams to help offset that going forward.
Alderman Lopez, does this budget get us any closer to ending the teacher strike out there, putting our kids back in classrooms?
Well, I think that there were some definite overtures made in her speech, particularly as it came to youth homelessness and addressing mental health issues, things that were brought up by CTU as part of their strike negotiations, that despite, you know, saying that this was written before the strike, that they're trying to make some gestures to say, look, from the city's end, we're working on it. But I don't necessarily believe that this is going to have a huge impact on moving CTU to come closer to the bargaining table, as well as SEIU, which seems to be the forgotten partner in this strike as well. Alderman
Waguespack, we're entering day 6. Your kids are not in school, in public school. How much longer is this going to go?
You know, I think we're looking at another week, because my understanding is there was no discussion today. And as that drags out over the weekend.
What was your understanding about why there was no discussion today?
It was my understanding that the mayor's people were at the table, but there wasn't anybody on the other side of it. And, you know, that's frustrating to hear as a parent. You want people at the table all day long, really working those numbers.
Though we heard an earlier report that Jesse Sharkey was at the table. Is that not your understanding?
Well, from my understanding, they've had 40 people at the table, the bigger delegation, and if that's what needs to get done, I understand CTU has this, they're obligated to fight on behalf of their teachers and the children, but I think everybody needs to be at that table at a constant basis.
Alderman Urban, what do you think the issue is that will break the back of this strike and get everybody back in school?
I think that parents, everybody applying pressure, I mean, we will reach a point where people will say enough is enough. I mean, with the surplus that started today, there's $150 million in revenue available for CPS to meet some of the obligations and goals that could be part of that contract. So again, we're moving fiscally in the direction. Now we talk about the surplus, and that also presents a challenge because that money could be surplus from the communities it was truly designed to help. So again, we want to make sure that this works and works for all parties in this endeavor. Of course, both sides have meaningful arguments, but at the end of the day, we got to get the kids back in the classroom.
Alderman Lopez, do you have a prediction on when this ends?
I know that the striking employees' insurance will lapse come November 1st, and I would hope that we'd be able to resolve this before people are personally impacted in that way. But I think that when you have groups like CTU and SEIU, who their union hasn't even been called back to the negotiating table by the mayor's office, this demand to refuse to negotiate by the mayor's team doesn't bode well for our city moving forward, especially with police and fire contracts coming immediately after this.
Alderman Waggy's back, Alderman Lopez, Alderman Urban, thank you very much for joining us on
Thank you for having me
tonight. Up next, as the Chicago Teachers Union and CPS try to hammer out a contract, a look at strategies and pitfalls in any negotiation. Stay with us.
Don't ever miss Chicago Tonight. Subscribe to our podcast. Get a daily download of our show delivered to your desktop or mobile device. Go to WTTW.com/Chicago Tonight Podcast and subscribe.
As the Chicago Teachers Union and Chicago Public Schools try to hammer out a contract, we wondered about some of the common strategies and pitfalls in any negotiation. For some help with that, we turn to Teresa Frisbee. She's director of the Dispute Resolution Program at Loyola University Chicago School of Law. Teresa Frisbee, welcome to Chicago Tonight. So we're not talking specifically about the Chicago teachers strike, but in a situation where you've entered into like the first full week of a strike, what is the dynamic between the parties in a situation like this?
Well, of course, I can't comment on a negotiation I'm not part of, but in general, negotiation can be very stressful. Something that we forget about is, as human beings, when we're in a situation where we have strongly different opinions, there's something that scientists call social threat. So Daniel Kahneman, who wrote Thinking Fast and Slow and won a Nobel Prize in economics, describes it as basically the same thing is happening to you when you're with somebody in an argument situation, in your body and in your brain, as if a tiger came into the room, right? You're ready, your heart beats faster, your blood pressure goes up, your pupils dilate, you're breathing faster, and stress hormones are elevated. And all of this is to get you ready for fight or flight, which is not very useful when you want to use, for example, the part of your brain that helps you do long-range planning and higher-level thinking and maybe come up with some creative solutions.
So stress and anxiety do not go very well with logical thinking and rational thinking. But might that explain why somebody might be taking the day off? For example, we just heard that negotiations did not happen today. Why would somebody take a day off in the middle of a dispute like this?
Well, we can't say for certain what that situation was, but there is some science out there specifically about in mediations where you have, like when I'm a mediator, I'm really helping two people to negotiate, right? That when you get in the situation, you get in the room and people become argumentative, that your stress hormone cortisol can go up for 2 hours. Dr. Martha McClintock at the University of Chicago and a local mediator have written a paper about this. So I actually advocate that people take breaks sometimes because they're not in their best cognitive shape to come up with creative solutions. I don't know that a whole day is necessary, but maybe that was what was required here.
Typically, we think of our opponent as the person who's a threat to us, for want of a better term, is sitting across the table from us. But are there situations where one becomes one's own worst enemy?
Well, certainly failing to recognize that there are different negotiation styles that can be used in a certain situation. So let's say if you only have one negotiation style, it's a competing style, and you're very aggressive. That might not mesh well in a situation where you could have benefited from, the other person is trying to do what's called interest-based bargaining. So interest-based bargaining is where you look beyond positions and you ask questions and you try to find out what are the interests of the parties on the other side. An example that comes to mind for me, a case I mediated with a 96-year-old woman. And one of her interests was that she had these tenants that were paying rent that was way below the market rate. And she really wanted to keep them because they made her chicken soup when she was sick, and they took her to the hairdresser, and she had this relationship with them. I could not have anticipated that that was one of her interests in this dispute. And that had nothing to do with the legal dispute, right? But by asking questions and really listening, and listening with an attitude of curiosity, trying to find out what was important to her, we found that out, and it became part of this global settlement of what was essentially a business dispute involving real estate.
So how does one resolve a basic disagreement on what the facts are in a negotiation?
Okay, well, I think what you need to do is communicate with the other side in a way that lets them maybe see that they've looked at one point of view and they've seen part of the problem, but maybe they didn't have all of the information, and that maybe you have part of that. So I just heard somebody describe negotiation as moving information around, because we don't always all have the same information.
What happens when you don't believe the other person about the information that they're giving to you?
Well, building trust is a huge part of negotiation. So there are things you can do to signal that you're trustworthy. Having a reputation as a trustworthy negotiator is very important. But you can sometimes build things into an agreement so you can proceed independent of trust. Maybe there's some way to make sure that what the person is saying is true. You're not insulting them, but just being a professional negotiator, you're just going to have to see those documents or whatever it is.
When is it clear that you have to blink?
When is it clear that you have to blink?
Right.
Well, if you've done your homework, what you've done is you've prepared your BATNA, it's called. So that's the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So if you've looked at, is the deal on the table better than if I proceed on the path I'm on, whether that's litigation or whatever it is, you know when it's time to walk away, because it's in your best interest to actually continue on with the dispute.
What role does face saving have to play in negotiations?
Well,
in other words, helping the other side save face so that they can come up with an agreement.
Well, that's right, and that's part of looking at their interests, right? So you may have to pay attention to what their constituents might be looking for, maybe give them something, maybe make the pie bigger. So you do that by looking at interests and looking for things that maybe there's something I don't mind giving up that's useful to you. And because we had this broader discussion about what was important to you, and I found out, for example, you have equipment that's out in the field and it's starting to rust and has nothing to do with our dispute, it has to do with your business, I might be able to say, I've got an empty warehouse and you can put that equipment in there. Now we've made the pie bigger. And so that might be something someone could go back to constituents with and say, okay, well, we didn't get all of that, but here, look, we got this other thing.
When is it time to bring in an outsider? Somebody who, for example, Mayor Emanuel got involved in the strike between the CSO musicians and management, and it was almost like within hours the dispute was settled.
Well, sometimes we're human, and sometimes the people that are we call it negotiation counterparts, right, not opponents, maybe some bad relationship has developed, and I'm not commenting on anything about current negotiations, but you can maybe sometimes bring in, like in business, you would often bring in maybe people that are more senior, and they're not locked into this dispute, and they have a broader view of the current problem, and that could change things up. So, you know, it depends on the person, but sometimes that can be helpful.
Teresa Frisbee, thank you for your insights. Very much appreciated.
You're welcome.
And for more on negotiation tactics, you can visit our website, WTTW.com/news. More trouble for Chicago's police chief, Amanda Vinicky. He has that story and more of what's making news in Chicago tonight. Amanda.
Phil, just this morning, Mayor Lori Lightfoot publicly praised Chicago Police Superintendent Eddie Johnson. But it appears police union leadership doesn't share that sentiment. The board of the Fraternal Order of Police today took a vote of no confidence in Johnson. An FOP spokesman confirms the vote but refused to give any information, including the reason behind the union's action. But it comes as Johnson's planning to boycott a speech by President Donald Trump to a national police chiefs meeting in Chicago early next week. In a statement, Johnson reiterates it was the board, not active FOP membership, then goes on to say, I understand and respect that the lodge is upset about the decision to not stand with the president. As police officers, our job is to be the voice for the voiceless and ambassadors to the communities that we serve. I can't, in good conscience, stand by while racial insults and hatred are cast from the Oval Office or Chicago is held hostage because of our views on new Americans. The Chicago FOP in April took a vote of no confidence in Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx. When they won the World Series in 2016, David Ross was the Cubs' catcher. Now the team's hoping he'll help win the North Side another, this time as manager. The Cubs haven't announced it, but numerous media reports say Ross has won the job. He'd be taking over for Joe Madden, who was let go at the end of the season. All summer, Chicago bird watchers and conservationists kept an eye on endangered piping plovers that made Montrose Beach their home. The birds, nicknamed Monty and Rose, are believed to be the first plovers to have nested in the city in 64 years. But where do they fly to for winter? We've got some clues. A researcher believes a kayaker in the Florida Keys snapped a photo of Rose. That professor of Minnesota, Francesca Cuthbert, tells Chicago Tonight that plover pairs do not winter together, so she's unsure of Monty's location, nor of the pair's offspring, but the birds can be identified as they're banded. As for the weather tonight, a slight chance of showers, otherwise mostly cloudy with a low around 41 degrees. Tomorrow, partly sunny skies, a high near 50. Now, Phil, back to you.
Thanks, Amanda. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, a congressional committee questions Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg on his company's plan to launch a cryptocurrency. The Illinois House Speaker is named in a federal subpoena. Our Spotlight team talks about that and other top political news. And inside the new massive Andy Warhol exhibition at the Art Institute. But first, some of today's top business headlines from Crain's. Here's Stephanie Goldberg.
Thanks, Bill. Bill Daley has left Bank of New York Mellon after less than 6 months as vice chairman. He started there following his loss in Chicago's mayoral election earlier this year. A bank spokeswoman says Daley's exit was expected since he was recruited by CEO Charlie Scharf, who recently left to lead Wells Fargo. The pair previously worked together in Chicago at JP Morgan Chase. Meanwhile, Boeing's commercial airplanes division has a new leader. Stan Deal, who's been with the Chicago-based company for more than 3 decades, replaces Kevin McAllister as president and CEO of Boeing Commercial Airplanes. McAllister became head of the commercial jet unit in 2016, 5 years after Boeing started building the 737 MAX. The company's been struggling to deal with the fallout from 2 737 MAX crashes that killed 346 passengers. Finally, a Chicago-based healthcare strategy firm has secured $22 million in new funding. Avia, which aims to digitally transform healthcare, offers consulting services and connects large hospitals with tech companies to drive innovative solutions. It currently has more than 50 health system members, including Northwestern and Rush. With the new funding, Avia will extend its network to include children's hospitals and insurance companies. It's raised more than $50 million to date. For Crane's Chicago Business and chicagobusiness.com, I'm Stephanie Goldberg. Back to you, Phil.
Thanks, Stephanie. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg says he won't launch Libra, that's the company's digital currency, without the go-ahead from U.S. regulators. But that didn't stop lawmakers from laying into Zuckerberg during his testimony before the U.S. House Financial Services Committee today. The questioning went beyond Facebook's proposed cryptocurrency.
Let me be clear, you do no fact-checking on any ads, is that correct?
Chairwoman, what we do is we work with a set of independent fact checkers who...
Somebody fact checks on ads. You contract with someone to do that, is that right?
Chairwoman, yes.
And tell me, who is it that they fact checked on?
Chairwoman, what we do is when content is getting a lot of distribution and is flagged by members of our community or by our technical systems, it can go into a queue to be reviewed by a set of independent fact checkers. They can't fact check everything, but the things that they get to, and if they mark something as false, then we...
All right, my time has expired.
Since Facebook announced Libra in June, the digital currency has raised several regulatory, privacy, and security concerns. Joining us to break down Libra and Zuckerberg's congressional testimony is attorney Zach Smolinski, whose firm Smolinski Rosario Law works with tech companies on several issues, including intellectual property and contracts. Smolinski also hosts and organizes cryptocurrency discussion groups. And Zach, thank you for joining us. We heard Zuckerberg being questioned on some of the other topics that came up today, but let's talk about what's on the table for us. First of all, more on what Facebook wants to do regarding cryptocurrency.
Sure, yeah. What they want to do is essentially launch a new type of money. Cryptocurrency can be thought of as digital money, money that exists in a different form than we're used to seeing cash in our day-to-day lives. So you can think of cryptocurrency as sort of money on the internet. There are a variety of different types of cryptocurrencies. And what Facebook and the Libra Association are trying to do in particular is to come out with a very specific type of currency, what's called a stable coin.
And how would it work? Say I want to participate in owning some cryptocurrency. How would I do it?
You got to get money out of your pocket or out of your bank account onto the cryptocurrency network. In this case, I think that's still an open question. The actual mechanics of how Libra is going to work are still somewhat to be sorted out. But essentially, you're going to have to get some of your money into the hands of the Libra Association. They will put Libra, and that's the name of the Libra, just as the dollar is denominated in a dollar, you will have what's called a Libra, and they'll put those Libra into your account, which takes the form of a wallet. A wallet is a digital holding place where this currency is going to reside. And that might be on your phone, it might be connected to your Facebook Messenger account or your WhatsApp account or even your Instagram account.
Why would I want to do that? If I have money in a bank or if I have access to a credit card, why would I want to be part of a cryptocurrency system?
Yeah, you might not want to. If you're happy with the ways that you can transact today without a cryptocurrency, there might be no reason to go into this. What Facebook will hope to do is to create a compelling marketplace so that consumers like you, like me, will want to have some of our money in the form of Libra so that we can transact with others who want to take that Libra from us for goods and services.
So in other words, it would facilitate the transfer of currency as opposed to my, doing PayPal or something like that?
Yeah, that's right, Phil. And so you could think of this as a sort of a separate over-currency overlying the entire world economic system. And so in a sense, if I wanted to transact with someone who resides in Europe today, I might need to transfer my money into euro somehow, and that might involve some transaction fees. If Libra works the way that Facebook and the Libra Association want it to, those money transfer fees won't exist, and you'll essentially send Libra or you'll receive Libra, and you won't have to have that sort of extra spend as a result of that currency, the transaction fee.
So there might be ease of transactions between people in different parts of the world. Why does Facebook want to do it?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think one of the issues here is it's really difficult to tell why a multi-billion-dollar company wants to do anything. So I can tell you what they're saying. What they're saying is that they want to increase the stickiness of their network. They want to get more people involved. If you can get people transacting on your network, in addition to sharing social media updates, you've basically brought in one more part of people's lives into your network. And perhaps Facebook wouldn't put it so, I don't know what the word is, but compellingly, right? But they basically want to make their network that much more attractive. Another thing that they're saying is that they have a somewhat altruistic goal here, and that there are a lot of people out there who don't have banks. They don't have bank accounts, they don't have access to banks. And in his opening remarks today, Mark Zuckerberg said he thinks there are about 1 billion people in the world who have cell phones but don't have bank accounts. So he thinks that he can offer Libra, and that Facebook and the Libra Association, which is this nonprofit that's going to exist in Geneva, can offer these people an alternative that they don't have.
And so there were questions today raising a bunch of concerns about this because, in theory, it sounds like a good idea. You can move money around the world easily. What are some of the concerns about it?
So a few concerns with cryptocurrencies in general are also going to apply to Libra. One of the concerns would be money laundering. If it's easy to form a fake account, for example, or to steal someone else's identity and move money through that account, that could facilitate money laundering. There are things like anti-money laundering laws that need to be complied with, right? So Facebook is saying, look, we're going to comply with all these rules that the U.S. sets forth before we do anything anywhere in the world. And I thought that was a relatively compelling story that he told today. Another issue.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No.
But another issue would be funding of terrorism. You know, how does the global financial system track the source and destination of funds?
You mentioned, alluded to the fact that he did say that he's not going to launch this if U.S. regulators don't give it the okay. What will it take for U.S. regulators to say it is okay?
Well, one of the tactics he's actually using is FOMO. He's saying, look, China is out there.
Fear of missing out.
Exactly, yeah, thanks for filling that in. So China is out there and making some hints that they're interested in issuing their own centralized cryptocurrency that could form a sort of an attractive option for people who want to use this digital money, right? So what will it take to get regulators to move over into Facebook's favor? First of all, I think they have to trust Facebook a little more than they do right now. They have to like them a little bit more. And there is sort of this, that's the carrot. And the stick that Mark Zuckerberg is using is sort of like, look, if you don't kind of agree with us and help Facebook put this together, there may be worse options that are going to come down the pike, and we have to be careful about that.
Is that a realistic threat? Is that a real possibility that China could take the lead on cryptocurrency?
I think so. I don't think it can be completely discounted. But I also think it's worth considering that the fact that Mark Zuckerberg may be trying to rush the regulators in this case. In other words, the fear of missing out is, it's a real thing, and it's a good way to get a lot of people who might not want to agree to something to agree.
Is Facebook basically on trial? Because it wasn't just cryptocurrency. There was a wide range of issues that Congress people asked him about.
Yeah, this was Facebook on trial, in my opinion, today. It was, I would say, about half of the testimony today had to do directly with Libra, and half had to do with a number of other issues that the Congress people wanted to bring up with Mark Zuckerberg. This was their chance to talk with one of the most powerful people in the country, if not the world, and they let him have it on a number of issues.
Zach Smolinski, thank you so much for joining us. We very much appreciate your insights.
Thank you, Phil.
And up next, today's top political headlines from our Spotlight News team.
Don't miss one of our stories. Get them all delivered to your desktop or mobile device with a subscription to the WTTW News Daily Briefing. Go to WTTW.com/Daily Briefing and sign up.
Illinois House Speaker and head of the Democratic Party of Illinois, Michael Madigan, has held state office since 1970. He's long been in the political limelight, as you well know, but now the feds may be shining their light on him. Reports say he was named in a federal subpoena. We'll get into that and dig deeper into the politics of the city budget with our Spotlight Politics team of Amanda Vinicki, Paris Schutz, and Carol Marine. Amanda, let me begin with you. Does the fact that Madigan's name shows up on a subpoena mean that he personally is under investigation?
I mean, not necessarily. We have no proof of that. But Phil, wow, are the sharks circling? We know that at the same time that the subpoena where he was named in, that was to the City Club of Chicago, which, by the way, of course, is a sponsor and helps us out here at Chicago Tonight, WTTW. But the same time that the City Club was raided was also when the feds went after some of his closest confidants. That includes former state legislator Mike McLean, who also has lobbied for ComEd, former alderman Mike Zalewski. His son now is a House Democrat in the Illinois House and is part of Democratic leadership under Madigan. So they're sure as heck getting close.
Carol, the federal probe seems to keep growing. Does that mean the feds are done at this point?
No. You want me to elaborate?
Yes, please.
They might just be beginning.
No, they're not done. I mean, right now they are in, they're looking, they're announcing themselves, they're pretty much scouting people who are ready to flip, just in case they need to save themselves and get in line first. But no, they are by no means done. And while everyone who's been searched or subpoenaed is not necessarily going to be charged, there are more people ready to be charged.
Paris, this all comes up after WBEZ reported that in May the City Club was raided. What do we know about this?
Well, thanks to the stellar reporting from WBEZ, they raided the City Club, which, if people don't know, it's a public affairs forum that all the players in Chicago's civic scene go to hear from politicians. They actually had to cancel an event they were going to have this week with the Illinois Department of Transportation, which is also named in some of these.
The tollway.
I'm sorry, the tollway, which is also named in some of these subpoenas. But what they were looking for, according to this report, with Jay Doherty, the president here, is information related to ComEd. Jay Doherty apparently is a lobbyist for ComEd, according to this report. And what it seems like they're putting together the pieces of is some alleged scheme where there were possibly ghost payrollers, people very close to Madigan, lobbyists that did work for ComEd at the time that ComEd sought for and got a big rate increase in Springfield.
And at the same time, the head of ComEd unexpectedly retired in the midst of all this. The City Club is well known, as you pointed out, political and civic institution. Any repercussions on the City Club, its reputation, its standing?
Not that we know of at the moment, and the City Club stands by its president, Jay Doherty, saying no one's been charged here, and that should speak for itself. But there are shockwaves, Phil, going all across this city and this state. And what we're seeing is, you know, these aren't people who sold their food stamps. These are people at the very top of the food chains of corporations, politics. This is a very different kind of federal probe.
Let's talk about something that we've already alluded to on the program, and that has to do with the city budget. What are the prospects for the mayor getting what she wants?
I think in Springfield, well, you can allude to Springfield, Amanda. In the city, if you know, there's some aldermen, Anthony Beal, Ray Lopez, who we heard on the show, that they're pretty against a lot of the mayor's initiatives, and they were possibly thinking that the budget might be the time when the wheels come off and aldermen stop supporting her. I don't think that's going to happen here. It might have happened if she was asking for $100, $200, $300 million in property tax hikes. She isn't asking for that. These are not heavy lifts. The Uber thing might be more difficult. I think that this will get revised before it's done, but it doesn't seem like something that's going to turn the city council into council wars.
Carol, the mayor has made a couple, three, rookie mistakes, for want of a better term. How would you assess her political capital right now with the teacher strike going on, with this budget hole that she's got to fill?
It's still pretty high. I mean, it's still pretty high, and the teacher's capital is as well. Yes, she's made a couple of mistakes, but nothing catastrophic. She's got a lot on her plate, and that includes other labor contracts coming down the pike. She's got the teachers, she has this budget, she has Springfield. This is not for the faint of heart, but she asked for this job. You know, nobody said, you got to take it. So,
Amanda, give us a beat on Springfield, because she says that no property taxes if we can get some help from no property tax increase if we can get some help from Springfield, the likelihood of that.
Ooh, that is a really big if, and that gets back to what we started our conversation with, and that is the distraction of this federal probe. Now, who knows, maybe that could help her, because you're going to want, Madigan will want members to be nice and busy to take any sort of heat off of him and reporters asking questions about who all is involved. That said, you're not going to see downstaters apt to say, oh good, more taxes, I'm going to help Chicagoans pay more. Even J.B. Pritzker, the governor, yes, they are both Democrats. He is a resident of the city of Chicago, but he has enough problems to deal with. He's also not going to want to open up again that can of worms. He's acknowledged and he's said, yes, a Chicago casino, we need that to happen. His transportation plan, a signature plan of his, is contingent on Chicago making money from that casino. But there's certainly has not been a whole lot of agreement or a lot of conversation from what we're hearing between the governor's and the mayor's offices, and that makes it difficult to get something through.
Comrades, that's where we'll have to leave it. Amanda, Paris, Carol, thank you all very much.
Thanks.
He was called the Pope of Pop art, that is. Andy Warhol predicted 15 minutes of fame for everyone. His own fame lasted decades and has endured since his untimely death in 1987. A blockbuster exhibition just opened at the Art Institute of Chicago. It is the first Warhol retrospective in 30 years. Chicago Tonight was there for a preview. The crowds arrived when the gates opened for a members-only preview at the Art Institute.
He's a singular artist, and he is somebody who has permeated the culture. He was able to put his finger on things that were absolutely of their moment, but also that live on and are relevant today.
Andy Warhol embraced the culture of celebrity and formed his own social network.
We're standing in a room with his celebrity portraits hung on cow wallpaper. These paintings he started in '68 as a kind of commissioned portraits. They were commissioned and sitters that he invited. Famous people, people who wanted to be famous, everybody from Liza Minnelli, Muhammad Ali, Aretha Franklin, Debbie Harry, the Shah of Iran, a kind of amazing coterie of people.
His portraits of luminaries are well represented here, as are his recreations of the commodities and oddities of popular culture. And if you're wondering, where are the soup cans? They're also here, but we can't show you. Some of his most famous works have restrictions on what media outlets can show. Warhol also reflected society's growing interest in crime and punishment, and tragedy and grief. And he endlessly experimented with technique and the manufacturing side of artwork.
Stencils, silk screens, all these different kind of mechanical techniques that actually also took his hand out of the production. And he often said he wanted to be like a machine and to take himself out of the work. He was a very radical artist in terms of how he worked with all these different techniques. This was at a time when painting was driven by abstract expressionism, by a kind of emotional virtuosity, and he brought this kind of cool, analytical look at American culture through the products of popular commodities. Self-portraits are such a critical part of his work. He used self-portraiture not as a way to reveal himself, but as a way to construct his public identity. He's ubiquitous as this kind of constructed idea of an artist and who was so engaged with fame.
Also on view, collaborations with young artists he championed, including Jean-Michel Basquiat, and later works including A Camouflage Last Supper. Andy Warhol unexpectedly died in his sleep at the age of 58 while recovering from surgery. He's buried in a suburb of his hometown, Pittsburgh.
This is the first major retrospective organized by an American museum in 30 years. It covers the full breadth of his production, not only the iconic pop masterpieces of the 60s and paintings of the 70s and 80s, but also his work in film and video and sculpture and prints and publishing. It is an exceptional opportunity for those familiar with Warhol and for those encountering his work for the first time to get an incredibly rich and profound glimpse of this remarkable artist's career.
The exhibition is called Andy Warhol From A to B and Back Again. It's now open at the Art Institute of Chicago and runs through January 26, 2020. There's much more Warhol to see on our website. And that is our show for this Wednesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7. Teachers closed out their 5th day of striking. How many more days will there be? The latest on contract negotiations. And tour Nevermore Park. That's a new art experience by Chicago muralist Hebrew Brantley. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Phil Ponce, and I thank you for watching. Good night.
Closed captioning for this program is brought to you by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, dedicated to preserving the dignity and rights of all individuals.